The question is that the bill be read a second time, and I call the honourable member for Denison.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it's truly regrettable and unavoidable that so many politicians in this country at federal and state level, across a number of political parties, they talk up the value of education, but in reality they're paying lip service to the value of education. And there is a good demonstration of that here in this place today with these proposals by the government to deregulate the tertiary sector. Now, I'll talk more about that in a moment, Madam Speaker, but perhaps if I start by talking more to my introduction and my concern that so many politicians seem to pay lip service to the value of education. Why, just in Tasmania right now, the Tasmanian state Liberal government is embarked on a program of cutbacks to primary and high schools and colleges, which is having a terribly serious impact on the public education system, on the students, on the teachers, on the other staff in those schools. And that's going on right now. In fact, Tasmanian primary schools at the moment are losing on average 2 staff members. Tasmanian colleges are losing right now on average 4 staff members. And this is having all sorts of serious implications for those schools. Now, the State Education Minister has said that on average Tasmanian class sizes will stay at around 25, or no more than 25. But I'm getting people contacting me in my office every day now talking about class sizes 29, 30, 31, 32 in rooms that are made for probably 20 desks. We're also seeing, apart from the increased class sizes, we're seeing programs being cut, in particular language programs, music programs, inter-school sporting carnivals and so on. All of that really important part of a person's education, they're being cut in the schools in Tasmania. In particular, kids with special needs are now getting less and less support. Obviously, kids with learning difficulties, kids with autism, but also gifted students. A whole range of children in the Tasmanian public education system that are not getting the support they need, which of course has a knock-on effect to the teachers who are having to work that much harder, not getting the support they need. And of course, the more a teacher has to focus on one particular student with a special need, the rest of the class is disadvantaged. So that's just Tasmania. Just in the public education system, we're seeing politicians there really paying lip service to the value of education. But it's not just the Liberal Party. I'll have a go at the Labor Party as well. When it comes to the tertiary sector, it was the Gillard-Rudd governments that stripped some $4,000 million out of education funding over the forward estimates, leaving our universities, before this government even came along, leaving our universities some $1 billion a year underfunded. So, the point being, Madam Speaker, and I think this is actually the underlying point about surrounding us here with this debate we're having today, is that politicians at state and the federal level, Labor and Liberal parties, they talk up how they value education, but the reality is they're not demonstrating that commitment. They're not funding education as well as we could in Australia. And let's face it, Madam Speaker, we live in a very rich and a very fortunate country. The budget varies from year to year, but it hovers around $400,000 million a year. Madam Speaker, surely that is enough money. Surely that's enough money to properly fund the public education system in this country at every level, from early childhood education through primary school, high school, colleges, technical and further education and the tertiary sector. There is enough money. It's all about priorities. But yet we are not properly funding our education in this country. Why should we value education? Why should we be putting more money in, Madam Speaker? Well, there's obviously many reasons. I mean, for a start, knowledge has an inherent value. It is good for a country, for a community, to have more knowledge. It inherently enriches us, enriches our community. And of course, it greatly advantages the individuals who are able to benefit from a better education. I mean, it's well documented, it's self-evident, that if you can give people a better education at every level, or at any level, those people are better off. It, in particular, lifts people out of poverty. You know, if someone is better trained, better qualified, they can get a better job. They can get on better in their life. It lifts them out of poverty. It makes for a healthier community. The fact is that better educated people, they will tend to know how to live a healthier lifestyle. They will tend to be able to afford a healthier lifestyle, healthier food, fruit and veggies. They'll be able to afford to go to the doctor. They will be a healthier community. And it opens up opportunities for them, wonderful opportunities. You know, one of the surest ways to lift disadvantaged people out of that disadvantage is to give them a good education, including give them access on merit, academic merit, to higher education, to a university education, because that's one of the most tangible ways to help those people from disadvantaged backgrounds. It also makes for a wealthier country, a better country, a more successful country. And I think it's very telling, Madam Speaker, that against our trading partners, Australia is falling behind when it comes to our education and our education outcomes. In fact, it was easy to find just this morning a survey out of the UK which ranked Australia 13th, broadly speaking, when it comes to education outcomes compared to other countries. And it was interesting that above us there was South Korea, Hong Kong, Japan, Singapore. Of course, much is made of the way China and the Chinese education system is going from strength to strength and becoming a real education powerhouse. Well, that will give our trading partners, our competitors in the community of nations, great advantages over us that will disadvantage us down the track, not the least of which is the fact that we will become less attractive as a source of education for foreign fee-paying students compared to other countries. Why would someone come from China to Australia to a university that's falling further and further behind in the international rankings, when in future they can stay in China at one of their increasing number of even better universities? Madam Speaker, if I could talk more specifically to the reforms that are on the table right now. I did not support the first version of these reforms, and I will not support this version and this bill. Frankly, I think, and I'm sure I talk for a great many people when I say that the move to make universities a market-based industry through deregulation is fundamentally bad. It is a bad decision and not something we need to do in this country, in a rich and fortunate country that can afford to properly be funded by public money. The fact is that moving to a market-based system will make courses dearer. That is self-evident. That is well documented now by any number of commentators and professional bodies in the community that are saying that if this move to deregulate and to move to a market-based industry is to be allowed to go ahead, then courses will become dearer. Simple as that. And of course, as courses become dearer, who are the first people to be disadvantaged by that? It's people on lower incomes. So this is all fine. This is all fine, Madam Speaker, and it's not helpful, Madam Speaker, that you're shaking your head when I'm giving my speech. It is self-evident. It is well remarked upon that the move to deregulation will result in dearer courses, and that will fundamentally disadvantage, Madam Speaker, people from disadvantaged backgrounds. But they won't be the only people who will find it harder to get into and to be educated in a deregulated tertiary sector. What about older students? People who are perhaps for a second career, going to uni, retraining, looking to a bright second career. They will have less time in the workforce, Madam Speaker, to be able to pay that increased debt. So too, Madam Speaker, women, because women tend to spend, obviously, less time in the workforce, so they have less time to pay back their HECS debts. So as you increase the cost of courses, and that it will be a tangible outcome of these reforms, it will fundamentally disadvantage people on lower incomes and from lower income families. Older students will have less time to pay off the greater cost of that training or that education. Women who will have less time in the workforce to pay back the greater cost of that education. And within the sector itself, it will fundamentally disadvantage smaller and regional universities, such as the University of Tasmania in my home state of Tasmania, but also right around this country. Any number of smaller and regional universities, because it's not a level playing field. In a market-based tertiary industry, these smaller universities, perhaps more remote, perhaps offering less courses, perhaps not as prestigious, they will not be as attractive in a deregulated industry, and they will struggle to compete with the big fancy universities in places like Sydney and Melbourne and the other capital cities. And as universities like the University of Tasmania struggles to compete, what does it mean for outposts like the Burnie campus and the Launceston campus, which currently run at a loss but can be cross-subsidised because of the current arrangements? But it will become more and more tempting for the University of Tasmania to cut unprofitable courses, to cut unprofitable campuses. And again, that will disadvantage people in those regions that are already populated with a disproportionate number of disadvantaged people, who already have a much lower level of engagement in tertiary education compared to people from the big cities. Deputy Speaker, it is simply not good enough, and it is not necessary to deregulate tertiary education in this country. It is not necessary to move to a market-based education industry when we have a very fine tradition of doing it the way we've been doing it, and we certainly have the wealth to keep doing it that way. In fact, what's needed, Madam Speaker, is not deregulation and less money. What's needed is more money. What we need to do for a start is to reinstate that $4 billion that was taken out of the universities by the former Labor government. That's the sort of thing this government should be looking to do, and that's the sort of thing this government can afford to do. Yes, there is a need for budget repair, but surely with a budget of around $400,000 million, we can find that $4 billion to restore the funding to its historical level. And then we should be looking to the future and how we can go beyond that and get up to the OECD average. Because, Madam Speaker, regrettably at the moment, our universities are funded at about 0.7% of GDP, compared to an OECD average of 1%. So at a time we're looking to cut back on our funding for the universities, we should instead be looking to find the money, and the money is there with the right priorities. We should be looking to find the money, Madam Speaker, to get our universities at least up to the level of funding of other members of the OECD, and I would add our competitors in the global marketplace, and I would add, Madam Speaker, competitors for the education dollar and foreign fee-paying students. In closing, Madam Speaker, make the point that before elections a lot of candidates and parties make a lot of promises, but I was handed the other day by the member for Indi a report that reminded me that the Nationals went to the last federal election promising a tertiary access allowance of $10,000 to try and bridge a financial divide between city and country students. So where are the Nationals on this? I would have thought the National Party in particular would be standing up to the Liberal Party and to the Education Minister on this, Madam Speaker, because not only do the national members of this parliament represent a lot of regional and rural universities, they represent all of those students who were promised an awful lot before the last federal election, which is not being delivered. Instead, what is being delivered is the promise of deregulation and a market-based system that will make courses dearer, will disadvantage regional and country universities, will disadvantage people from poorer backgrounds, will disadvantage older students, will disadvantage women. The only people it will advantage is the government that will have to pay less money to universities in the future, and the big 8 universities that are rubbing their hands together. The universities that can pay or can charge whatever they want because they're big and prestigious, and don't worry about the rest like the University of Tasmania. That's what they're thinking. Thank you, Madam Speaker.